It's my great pleasure today to be talking to Professor Huzur Saran, who has been my teacher and he's been my colleague. Huzur is coming up to retirement now, and we thought this was an opportunity to talk to him, get some insights from him, find out a bit more about him. So Huzur, first question I want to ask you is, when did you join IIT Delhi, and what made you decide to join IIT Delhi as faculty?
IIT Delhi and I have had a long association. I joined IIT Delhi as a student in '78. At that time, of course, when I was studying in school, hardly anybody knew about IITs. It was not such a big thing as it later became. But my friends were filling a form saying we are going to do an engineering college called IIT. So we're filling a form. So I said, okay, I'll also fill a form, because at least I knew I wanted to do engineering.
Right.
And fortunately, I did well in the exam, and I joined IIT. So I spent 5 years. It used to be a 5-year course back then. During my undergrad, which was in electrical. There was no computer science back then. In fact, the computer science department started. I graduated in '83, and I think the computer department started around '82.
'82, yes, that's right.
So of course, I worked with some of our senior professors who were later also in computer science. Professor Maheshwari, Professor Jay, and Professor Mibi Madan used to be my thesis advisor, and many others.
Madan, yeah.
So it was a very good experience studying here. It was at that time, of course, since the student strength was small, our entire batch was 207.
Wow.
So it was much smaller than it is now, and so the classes were only 40 or so. Every faculty member knew every student.
Right.
By the time you ended up in second or third year,
right,
if you were walking by the corridor, faculty member would recognize you by name. So it was a very nice, very sort of, in a sense, elite experience. Let me put it that way. And so after I graduated from IIT Delhi, I started, first I had no intention of going abroad. At that time, most of my friends were already planning to go abroad, or some of them went to work for, there was a very popular company at that time called Schlumberger,
yes,
which used to pay a lot.
Yes.
The figure was like $100,000 at that time.
Wow.
Right? Per annum. Right? It's an enormous sum in today's money. Right? But of course, it was a very hard job. Some of my friends who went there went through a grueling experience. Some did well, some not. But anyway, that was not for me. I joined a company straight out of here. And what they were doing was very interesting. One must say, technologically, they were building a full OS and compiler for a mini computer.
Oh, wow.
An x86 based mini computer. It was the original x86, 8086,
right.
and they were building a mini computer out of that, like a PDP-11 kind of thing,
Right.
And they were building their own compiler, their own OS, and also the PC age had just begun. PC had come out in '81. There were hardly any PCs in India at that time, so it was all very early back then. But so they were doing interesting work. It was not that the work was terrible, but somehow there was a feeling that business-wise they were not going anywhere. And in some sense, there were kind of things we studied here at IIT. The problems were still not that challenging. So then I went on to do my PhD at Berkeley. I applied, and there was a process, of course. It took time and all that. And then after that, I thought I would come back. And of course, since I knew the faculty here and I had worked with them, so I applied here to IIT Delhi. It also, Delhi happens to be my hometown, so it made more sense for me. Although I had also got an offer back then for ISC Bangalore. But anyway.
So in those days, in the 80s, people who went to the US typically did not come back. Many of your contemporaries for them are still there. So what made you decide to come back here?
In hindsight, I don't know what all went into my head. But I just felt that my family ties here were very strong. That was one reason. And I felt that it would be a challenge and it will be interesting, because I felt that we were doing good stuff at IIT Delhi, but we were not recognized internationally back then. IIT Delhi, maybe the people who admitted our graduates in the top US universities did recognize us, but the wide industry did not recognize us. And it's not that we were having many research papers from top tier conferences from here. There were only so many faculty, and they had also burdened with a lot of teaching load. And the whole research ecosystem was also very
Right.
Limited at that time.
At that time. So your PhD work was quite theoretical in nature, but when you came here, I think in the initial years, I remember with Vijay Vazirani, you had some collaborations, but then you pivoted to more applied stuff, networks and all, which is what you've been working on in different forms for a long time now. So how did you make that pivot?
Okay, so as I mentioned that after my graduation, I spent a couple of years.
Right.
And that was really hardcore systems, what I was doing there. You know.
Right. So you had some experience.
File systems, things like that. So I had, I did not, but when I went back to Berkeley, I found the theory to be very interesting and challenging. So I did my PhD in graph theory and algorithms back then. And then when I came back, it so happened that Vijay Vazirani also came back almost the same month or...
Oh, I see.
We both came in the beginning of the 1990 semester.
Right, I see.
1 month here or there.
Right.
And then naturally we started working together because I had known him even in Berkeley. He had done his PhD at Berkeley and he used to visit there.
Right.
So he was at Cornell by then.
Right.
So we started working together. Then we said, well, core algorithms, a lot of work has happened. But approximation algorithms was something very new then. It was very few approximation. So we started working on that. And that we found to be a very enjoyable experience working here. And fortunately, we were not limited when doing good theory by the resource limitations of the time.
Right, of course.
So that was good. We were able to publish in top tier conferences from here. So that was a good experience. Then what happened in 1993? Actually, Keshav.
Yes.
Okay. So Keshav is also a graduate from.
Right. Of course.
He used to be in my hostel, so I knew him from there. And then he was in Berkeley.
Right.
At the same time, we done a couple of courses, systems courses together,
I see.
which we did an interesting project also. So when he came here, he also decided to spend a semester here from Bell Labs, and we started chatting. And he said, well, there are a lot of system problems. Why don't we get students? See, undergrad students, it was hard for them to do straight high-end theory. So let's get them interested in building. And so he developed a concept. At that time, ATM, asynchronous transfer mode, as it was called, was a big thing.
Yes, that's
right. And that was for providing quality of service in networks, right? And so he said, let's build a emulated ATM stack using low-cost PCs. And he called it the IDLENet, the IIT Delhi low-cost integrated network.
Very nice.
Right? And so I started helping with them. I got involved. We actually ended up with a paper during his visit here in Infocom. So then I got, and since I had the background in systems
so
from my 2 years of work, so it was easier for me to get that off the ground. So then I slowly got more and more involved. I got pulled into more of that because we didn't really have too many systems people also. So, so that became over time, slowly became took more of my time.
So I was probably amongst the first 2 or 3 batches whom you taught. And at that time,
you were the same batch as
Kamal Jain. In '92, I joined. And '92 was also the year of the new curriculum was started, in which we started teaching functional programming. And you taught us that course for the first time. And my understanding is you were also involved in developing that course, and along with the others in the department. So, how was the teaching experience in those early days, in the '90s and all?
So, it was a good teaching experience. And of course, the infrastructure was not that great. It was there, but I remember the first class I taught. It was in the main building on the I think 5th floor or something. A room with a very steep set of benches. And it was August, so it was extremely sweaty. And I was teaching data structures to a bunch of very young people. But the positive thing is the people were very bright. There was a lot of interactivity because it was a small class of 40 people. And there was a lot of motivation among the students also. And so it was a good experience that way. And then in their projects, a lot of interesting things were got done. One of my students, we asked him to, in his BTech project, to work on ATM signaling strap, UNI it was called.
Right.
And he developed it from scratch. It was quite a complex project.
Wow.
In fact, Keshav said you could license it because we didn't have any infrastructure to go about marketing and licensing it. But there was a company called Trillium that was making something almost similar to what we have and was valued enormously. But back then we had no clue how to go about doing that.
Right. So coming up to the present, so I would say that you had a ringside view on many of the key technologies that have shaped our current times. So can you tell us a little bit about your involvement, how you have seen the technology development, and also tell us where you see India today in terms of these communication, networking technologies and so on?
So, as I mentioned, my involvement with the networking began in '93 in that time, and of course, it so happened that was the start of a very big boom in internet. Internet also sort of became available outside the academic domain and became very big in that mid-90s, early 90s. And so there was a huge boom around internet technologies. And then in 2000, I went for a sabbatical to a Stanford startup. Stanford and then to a Stanford startup from Professor Paul Raj, which was trying to say wireless internet.
I see.
Right?
Okay.
Which eventually is the core technology that became 4G.
That's right.
So in that sense, I've had a good exposure to both the core internet technologies and then to the wireless version of those technologies. And if you look at it, one major transition that has happened in the last 20 odd years is the explosion of internet and then the explosion of wireless internet to the extent it is today.
Correct.
So that has been a huge scale up.
Massive scale up,
Right. So that's one big thing. I think the sort of, if I go back and look, when I was a student at Berkeley, towards the end when I was graduating, I had a semester after I filed my thesis and I was teaching a course in Berkeley and theory of computation at Berkeley. Plus I had some extra time, so I was allowed to, under the practical training rules, consult for a company which was one of my friends who used to work with me here. He was then in that company. So that was a company trying to do what freight forwarding, basically like a FedEx or something in its time. And they asked me to help them develop a shipment tracking system. What you do today when you search for track on this thing. But at that time, the infrastructure was, you had one mainframe, and then you had lease lines going to all their offices, all over the world. They had some 700 offices all over the world, and they had lease lines from there coming to this one mainframe in South San Francisco, Burroughs mainframe. And then, on that you could launch a query and get the same shipment query, everything. And so it was fundamentally the same system, similar algorithms, but it was on a mainframe and this dedicated network. If you look at it today, the same thing has moved to a cloud and to this internet-based infrastructure. So what you are having is of course, multi-tenancy, both in the internet, not a single leased line, but everybody shares the line. And multi-tenants, instead of a single data center, you have a distributed system on this thing. So it's a huge scale up in the core computing technologies. Both in the other parts that of course have occupied a lot of us have been all these security, privacy challenges. Once you scale it up,
then all
is a
these
natural
problems
consequence.
will come. That's right. So I wanted to specifically ask you about where does India stand in the technology race today, and how do you see the future? How should our students, faculty see the future, and how should we approach it?
So let's start with the top education institutes in India. At that time, they had potential, but they didn't have either scale, or they didn't have the necessary research ecosystem support to be able to compete in the top venues. Fortunately, today, over those 30 years, the development of India, growth, all of that, and the additional funding both from alumni and from government and industry and all of that has allowed us now to have a much more thriving PhD ecosystem, many more faculty in all the major IITs and ISCs and all that. And to some extent even in the non-IITs, the desire to do research and the incentives for that and the have improved. So that's good. Of course, it still needs probably another couple of magnitudes of scaling.
Yes,
we are nowhere near some of our neighbors.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
But we are in the right direction at least, right? And that depends on the size of your economy, how much people can do. But also the whole startup ecosystem, the domestic technology ecosystem from... I remember when I graduated, I even spent a few months in TCS. It used to be an 800 employee company. Now it is 600,000 or something.
That's right.
So the whole thing has scaled enormously, and there is much more of the talent and much more advanced talent than just simple applications. So you see it in many places, and VLSI and all that. So I think we are in a much better position. But of course, we are still not leaders in most of these things. That still needs us much more investment and much more dynamic availability of capital, risk capital.
Risk capital, exactly.
Because you need, you may have bright ideas, right? If just go back to the idea of that trillion, what the student had done. If we could go and ask somebody, okay, put X amount of money in it, the student will hire 4 or 5 people, and we'll start hire a couple of marketing people. We could easily in that time, now that I look back at it, have been able to market that as a competitor.
Exactly.
See, so that whole infrastructure is still limited. I'm not saying it's not there.
It's there,
but it is still limited, and most of the focus is on which is not a wrong reason to do it, for marketing things to the Indian consumer rather than to the global technology marketplace.
So, Huzur, I think definitely as a professor you were quite loved by all your students, but I think even as a colleague, people have always had a soft spot for you. Tell us about your experiences with colleagues in the corridors of the department over these 20-30 years.
I think my idea is to always have fun, right? And I am happy to present even serious issues as a joke, right? So that is always more convenient for people to relate to, and so we spent. I think we have had good times, even when we were studying. But when we were doing research, like approximation algorithm research with Vijay, I remember what we would do. There was a canteen at the top floor called the I floor canteen. We would sit there, we'll keep working with a pen and paper and keep ordering the bread roll and chai. Right? And then when we got bored of that, we'll go down to Evergreen, especially in the winter, and have the malpua and rabdi. So we always wanted to sort of have the serious thinking as well as the small pleasures of life.
Small pleasures of life are very important, that's right.
So in that sense, we have had a good, I don't think we have ever had any argument with anybody. I don't at least recall anything. And I think the department environment has always been, even the people who were senior to me, who started the department, they always kept a very positive attitude within the department, which was, and being small is easier also.
That's right.
When you're large, you have too many divergent views, but it has been a good experience overall. And I think with the students also, unfortunately now the number of students is so large that you cannot completely recognize everybody all the time. That has been one of the drawbacks of scaling.
That's true. That's true. So, regarding this, some of our students, other people out there who are contemplating a career as a faculty member in an area like CS, what would your advice to them be?
Okay. So, this is a bit challenging. You see, CS, when I joined, this whole became part of computer world in a sense. See, when I was in high school, they took us in class 10 to a trip where they took us to Coca-Cola and IBM. In Coca-Cola, of course, they made us drink a bottle of Coca-Cola each in the factory.
Right.
And this is before Coca-Cola was kicked out in 77.
That's right.
Before that, right? And then we went to IBM, and IBM, they had a 1401 or something.
Right.
And first sang a song, and then it took all our birthdays and produced a horoscope of IBM.
I see.
So that was our first exposure to computers.
I see.
But when we came here to IIT, of course, we had mainframes, and at that time, computers were primarily enterprise tools.
Yeah.
Right? It was not a public thing, right? Only enterprises were doing it. This whole scaling that has happened, right, has made it a society-wide tool.
Right.
And now it's embedded everywhere in cars, robotics, so many things. All the ideas were talked about even then. AI, natural language, all of that. But we didn't really have any real results from that. So in that sense, computer science is much more mature today than it was then. So in that sense, some opportunity set is different now.
Yes.
Right? Just like with any mature field, if you were in physics in the 1920s,
that's right.
What you did then, you cannot claim to be able to do that.
No, not today.
But that does not mean that there are not opportunities. And in the case of computer science, one of the things also that happens is as you finish and do better at the lower levels, and they get solved. When compilers came, assembly language programming and hardware-based programming. You know, when I first joined IIT, there were people in one of the labs who could program a computer using just bits.
Wow.
You know, there was a small PDP-8, I think, which had little switches. You set them to 8-bit pattern, and that 8-bit pattern got fed in, and you would load a program that way. You know, Naresh Kala could do that. In Professor Madan's lab. That was another time. So now today we moved up many layers. I don't know. But if you read all the statements that are made about how AI is going to help you code in a big way, maybe at some point you will write your specific. There are limitations. I don't think you can. It is exactly there yet, or it will ever be there yet. But you write your specifications and it will churn out the lower layers. So imagine you can do that. So just like you have a compiler, now you have a compiler plus.
Exactly.
You still have to define what is to be done, how it is to be done also, because I don't think the lower layer can finalize all the algorithm for you.
Absolutely.
At a higher level of abstraction, just like pseudocode, something higher level of abstraction, you will have to specify the module. I don't think you can also demand it to just decide all the modules themselves. So there is still a lot of opportunities. Not people doing hardcore compilers became less, but many other people did very well out of it. So the same way, I'm sure at higher levels of abstraction, closer to the application, closer to fundamental technologies, and of course complexity theory algorithms, of course, it remains a rich area. So I'm sure there's a lot of scope, and it's more about, in the end, what drives you and what interests you.
Actually, that's the key thing. So, last question, number of our alumni and your former students are also watching. Any message for them?
Well, I wish them all the best. I'm sure they've been doing an enjoyable career where they are, and we wish them all the best. And they should continue to do well, and hopefully they should come and meet us once in a while. Right? It would be good to also exchange notes once in a while, maybe encourage some of our younger students with their shared experiences.
Absolutely. So Huzur, thanks so much. As I mentioned, I've been your student and I've been your colleague. And I'm also alumnus of the same institution where you were a student. So there are many different populations on whose behalf I'm speaking to you today. And would like to thank on behalf of all those people, I would like to thank you for all the contribution, all the fun that you have shared with us. And I remember when my first lecture in my first semester at IIT was CS 120, which you taught, and that was the only class in that whole semester that I never wanted to miss. You made it a very enjoyable experience. I think the enjoyment of what you were doing, the pleasure that you got in it has always been contagious, not just for me but for everyone. So thanks a lot for all the contribution, and of course, retirement is just one comma in the long road, and we will hope to have you around and have the pleasure of your company for a long time to come. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Amitabh, and I agree with you that in the end, whatever you do, if you don't enjoy it or love it, and then you cannot communicate it also, then that is not so much so great for you also. You see, in the end, other outcomes can always happen, whatever you do.
Absolutely.
So,
Thanks a lot. Thank you.